passed, which is the Jarvis-Gann initiative that basically stops cities from raising property taxes. And then a few years later, other measures that stop cities and counties from raising taxes. Government was less able to function as a social arbiter and as a force for social equality. And after Ronald Reagan got elected in 1980, the federal government systematically dismantled the social safety net, federal support for housing, and a progressive tax code. And essentially what happened at that point is, as business was deregulated in ways that we had never seen before. It was much, much harder for unionized workers to organize. And the tax code began to favor the rich and disfavor the poor. And federal housing money disappeared. It used to be that there was federal money to build affordable housing in American cities. Lyndon Johnson had the war on poverty. Money came into cities so that people who were in a marginal economic situation weren't homeless. That people at least had a place to live, even if they were unemployed for a long time, that you didn't have homeless families on the streets.
Right.
And this country has just gone, starting then, until now, in a very, very different direction. And you see the results of public policy on the streets every day, from the homeless people to the fabulous astronomical wealth that you've seen created in this country, where, as I say, the gap between up here and down here is dramatic and is profound. That is a result not of the invisible hand of Adam Smith. That is a result of particular social policies that were put in place at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level.
And that played out in San Francisco. As I remember, I grew up in Noe Valley. Many of my artist friends and musician friends and that all of a sudden were priced out of where they were living, and they all moved to Oakland. They all moved away, and it changed. The whole complexion of the city changed, and all these people were coming in that were buying beautiful houses and redoing them and having BMWs, and all of a sudden the whole complexion of the city changed. Then you'd start to see homeless coming in more and more. And what is the reason why a city can't look at that and just say that's wrong?
Well, they could, and they can. What happened in San Francisco in the 80s was that under then Mayor Dianne Feinstein, the city took the position that all development is good, and that all controls on growth, controls on rents are bad, that anything that's good for big business and landlords is good. And that's the position that Dianne Feinstein took. So we were unable to get through an effective rent control bill in San Francisco that would have limited rents when a building becomes empty, as they did in Berkeley. We were unable to get any controls on downtown development through during that period. And so what happened was the city very rapidly gentrified. When I moved to San Francisco in 1981, you could still get an apartment in a group house for $100 a month. My first apartment, your viewers are going to die when they hear this, my first apartment on the corner of Hayes and Fillmore, a nice big one-bedroom apartment with a big turret window, was $225 a month.
Oh my God.
And what the result of that was is no one I knew worked full-time. They were artists. They were musicians. They were involved in politics. Everyone I knew was active in something, and you just kind of had a job on the side to pay the rent and eat. And nowadays, young people who arrive in San Francisco, it's hard to imagine how you can do it, because you need a high-paying job, and you're working 3 jobs, and you're working all the time just to pay the rent. It's hard to have time for this explosion of artistic stuff that we saw, and we still see in the city to a certain extent. But the cost of housing has dramatically changed San Francisco, and I would say that is something that is a matter of public policy. A city can say, as a matter of policy, we do not want to see gentrification occurring. We do not want to see, during the dot-com boom, so many wealthy people coming in from out of town and displacing the artists and the low-income residents who live here. You can pass laws to prevent that. Dianne Feinstein refused to do that. Willie Brown refused to do that. And it is because of those decisions that we're in the situation that we're in right now. San Francisco could have effective tenant protection laws. We could have effective rent control, although it's harder now with what the state of California has done. But again, that's a policy decision. You can make those decisions that it's important to a city to have young people, that it's important to a city to have artists, that it's important for a city to have musicians, that it's important for a city to be a place where immigrants can come and get a start. That's a policy decision you can make. And if you don't make that decision, you get the problems that we have now.
Yeah. And so many people came in, and I remember them coming in and saying, it's so quaint here. It's so lovely. All the artists and everything. And then the artists are gone. It's like you guys just priced us all out of this.
That's how
this
gentrification works, is people come in and say, oh, I want to live in a nice bohemian artist place.
Yes,
but I can pay more rent than you can.
Let's
and guess
keep
what?
The bohemian artist out.
Guess what? I can pay more rent than you, therefore you're going to lose your apartment. And unless unless cities step in and say we aren't going to allow this, it's going to happen. The demand for housing in San Francisco is insatiable. You can never build yourself out of a housing crisis in San Francisco. You can only regulate yourself out of it. And, you know, when people who are landlords complain about this, I always say, landlords in San Francisco, unless you brought your property 10 minutes ago, even in this recession, it's going up in value, you know? Homeowners and landlords have very little to complain about in this town. It's the people who are renters and who are newcomers and who are immigrants and who are artists and who need a little bit of help from the city. Those are the people we need to be thinking about.
Yeah. And Tim, but you and I, both being parents, have chosen to raise our children here and believe in the city and want the city to do well and want the city to be a wonderful environment for our children. And yet it's difficult.
It's difficult, but that's why I'm still here, and that's why I'm still at The Guardian every day, and that's why I get up and go to work every morning, because I believe in cities. And I believe in San Francisco. I believe that the future of America really isn't going to come from Washington, D.C., or from national stuff. It's going to come from cities. Cities have always been the crossroads of culture and the places where new ideas emerge. And San Francisco has always been one of those places. And I hope always will be. And that's, I believe so deeply in this city and in trying to keep this a livable place that really that's what I do with my life. And, you know, I'm raising my kids in the city. I'm sending my kids to public schools. I support the public schools in San Francisco. And, you know, we want this to be our community too.
And you did have something in The Guardian just recently about sending the city officials' children to public school and how important that is, because that's part of the city and that they belong there with everybody else's kids.
Absolutely. And, you know, if the mayor of San Francisco sends his soon-to-be-born child to public schools, he will get a sense of what the public schools are like. And if the middle class and the wealthier people and public officials send their kids to public schools, there's more support for public schools. That's a reality of life. And that's what should be happening. Absolutely. I think any city official who, unless you have a religious reason, and I know there are people in politics who, for religious reasons, want to send their kids to Catholic schools, for example. Unless you have a religious reason, you should send your kids to public schools, because that's part of what San Francisco's about. And we should not only support the public schools, you should show, as a city official, and as any kind of civic leader, that you believe in public education and that instead of saying, oh, I love the public schools, but they're not good enough for my kids. My kids are going to go to this $25,000 a year private school because I can. You should be saying, no, all kids should get a quality education in San Francisco.
Is that going to happen?
Is that going to happen with Gavin Newsom? I emailed that question to his press secretary, Nathan Ballard. Nathan will only respond to questions in email from me. He won't even pick up the phone and talk to me. He occasionally deigns to respond to one of my emails. He did not deign to respond to that one when I asked him if the mayor had any plans to send his kid to the public schools. I sure hope he does.
Well, it was amazing when they announced the baby being born, the baby being born. I could not believe it. Half the paper in the Examiner was putting the faces together and making the baby names, what they should do.
I mean, you're right.
What's the news? Where's the news?
You know, I laughed at that too, and I wrote about that. It's almost as if they consider Gavin Newsom some kind of civic royalty. It's like, you know, the King and Queen of England are having a child. I mean, yeah, it's news. It's interesting. The mayor's going to have a child. Good for him. Congratulations. I'm glad he's going to be raising a child in the city. I hope that he never has to use the social services for children and families that he's cutting.
That's a good point.
But this is not a double truck in the Examiner. This is not that gigantic news, which also, you know, speaks to why I'm at The Guardian, because I think we have a more realistic view of what news is in the city than some of the daily papers have had.
Yeah, you may not get the complete news or even the story at all in many of the papers, but I do know what Madonna's doing.
Yes, exactly.
And Chris Brown hurting me on and all this other. Let's talk a little bit about the Chronicle, because that's very important right now with what's going under. Is it going to go under, do you think?
Well, I think the first thing that's happening is management at the Chronicle is trying to intimidate the unions and say, if you guys don't give up a lot of things that were considered part of the heart of a union contract, like seniority rights, which the Guild just gave up, we're going to shut the paper down and no one's going to have any jobs. Personally, I think that Gavin Newsom, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, Dianne Feinstein, and Barbara Boxer, powerful senators, should say, no, you cannot shut down Hearst Corporation. You cannot shut down a daily newspaper in San Francisco if there's a willing buyer. And there are people out there, the Guild's talking about how they'd like to buy the paper. There should be a non-profit consortium or somebody who comes out and says, we'll buy it. In fact, we'll take it off your hands for $1. Christine, you and I could raise $1 together. We can buy the Chronicle.
Let's buy the Chronicle.
Hearst should not be able to shut it down if there's someone who wants to take it off their hands. They gave the Fang family the Examiner for free and then gave them $60 million to run it for a few years. That should be the minimum standard. If you don't want the paper anymore and you're going to shut it down, give it to us, give it to the community, give it to someone who wants it, and give us some money to run it for a few years and see if we can turn it around. Because it's not just the economy. It's bad management decisions. It's bad journalism. They have not done a good job running that paper. And that's one of the reasons that they're in such trouble.
It's almost like playing basketball